In 1953, on a stretch of high desert in Southern California, a former aircraft engineer named George Van Tassel began to write down what he said was not his own. He had left the aviation industry to live beside a great rock and a small airfield few people ever visited. There, he claimed, a framework of ideas was handed to him, a structure for understanding the universe that he insisted he had only received and never invented. The first idea was the strangest. Every thought that can ever be thought, he said, already exists. The mind does not manufacture ideas the way a factory makes parts. It tunes to them. To think is to receive, to lower a net into a sea of thought that was always there. Genius and madness alike are only a matter of which frequency a mind happens to catch. It began, he said, as a problem of tuning, an operator adjusting frequency and temperature until a signal locked in from somewhere beyond ordinary range. What answered described itself as a craft shaped like a diamond, moving in ways no aircraft could. To the frightened ear on the ground, it sounded almost like a monster. But the voice behind it was patient, and it had come a very long way to be heard. They named their world Natugea. The beings who lived there, the account says, were shaped something like a pear, broad below and narrow above, standing anywhere from 2 to 13 feet tall. They had no legs as we would know them. They moved by lifting clear of the ground, and around the upper body ran a ring of 32 eyes, so that nothing in any direction was ever truly behind them. These visitors belonged to what the writings call the Adamic Confederation, a civilization born not on any single planet, but in space itself, older by far than the Earth. They were not bound to one density of matter the way we are. They could thin or thicken the very substance of their bodies and their ships, becoming visible or vanishing at will simply by changing the rate at which they vibrated. And here the account turns to an old line in Genesis. When the creation of man is described, the words are strange. Let us make man. Not let me, but let us. Who, Van Tassel asked, was the rest of that sentence? Creation, he suggested, was never the act of a single solitary hand. It was a plural work, carried out by many. This, he said, is the missing link that was never missing. The Adamic race came down from space and bred with the early line of Earth, with the children of Eve. What science searches for as a single vanished ancestor was never a creature at all. There is no link to find, because there was no link. There was only a meeting and a mingling of two kinds of being. Behind all of it, the writings describe three forces. The first, called G, is a still and infinite light, motionless, complete, the ground of everything. From it arise two others. A positive outward push, and B, a negative inward pull. Wherever the positive and the negative cross, matter appears. Every atom, he said, is simply a knot tied where those two currents meet. So the universe is built of opposites, light and dark, push and pull, rising and falling, every pair you can name. But God, in this telling, never moved. The still center holds, only the unbalanced travels. Only what is out of true goes searching. Peace is not somewhere far away. Peace is the place that never left the middle. There are 12 of these, he taught, not dimensions but densities, levels of vibration through which all life climbs. Earth itself was moving between them. On the 20th of August, 1953, he marked the moment our world crossed from the third density toward the fourth. A passage felt by no instrument, and yet, he insisted, the most important date of our age. Such a crossing, the writings warn, is not gentle. 3 great cycles were closing at once, and the planet would rebalance itself upon its poles to meet the higher rate. The old books had a name for what comes then. They called it the Great Earthquake, not a punishment, but a house cleaning, the earth shaking itself level for what comes next. Even the sun, he said, is not what we see. At its heart lies a core with the shape of a cube, square, ordered, hidden. The blazing ball we look up at is only its outer shell, the part that has been switched on. The true sun is seen not with the eye, but with the mind. For the eye reports only the surface, and the surface is the smallest part of the thing. And the old word for messengers, he claimed, hid a simple error. A scribe long ago, copying by hand, turned a single letter and made angle into angel. The sky people who came down were never winged spirits. They were beings who arrived along precise angles of approach, geometry mistaken across the centuries for wings. One night, the account says, a visitor stood at his bedside. His wife lay beside him, held still as if outside of time, while above the house a craft hung silent in the dark. The visitor gave a name, Solgonda, and began to speak. And the strangest part, Van Tassel wrote, was this. Every question he formed in his mind was answered before he could open his mouth to ask it. Around the visitor's neck hung a single crystal. It was, he was told, a perfect defense. The crystal bent light around the one who wore it, so that the wearer simply was not there to be struck or seized. This, the writings suggest, was the same quiet tool by which a man called Jesus is said to have passed untouched, through crowds that meant him harm. A separation was coming, but not the kind the churches preached. People would be sorted not by virtue and not by worth, but by vibration, by the rate each soul had reached, and no savior would do the sorting for you. Every day, by what you thought and chose, you were quietly qualifying yourself, raising or lowering the very frequency that decides where you belong. At the center of it all stood the Council of Seven Lights, a gathering of high beings overseeing this region of space, among them one remembered as Luctus, and another known only by the letter M. Their counsel to those who would listen was plain and almost humble. Store food beneath the ground, prepare quietly, and hold to the seven lights as the dark of the crossing came on. The Great Pyramid, in this account, was never a tomb. It was a machine, raised by survivors of a drowned Atlantis who still remembered how. It gathered the Earth's own energy and poured it through the stone, and a body laid in the king's chamber would be charged by it like a cell upon a wire, renewed by a current the builders understood, and we forgot. He left a method, simple enough to sound like nothing. At night before sleep, think clearly of the need, not the want, the need. And then by morning, let it go entirely. Release it as though it were already answered. Do this and forget it, for 28 days. The forgetting, he said, is the whole secret. The held thing cannot arrive while the hand stays closed around it. And in the end, the framework came back to a single quiet claim. Eternity is not later. Heaven is not elsewhere. It is a door standing open here on earth, leading to God in this very moment. You were never outside it, waiting to be let in. You were inside it the whole time, and the only thing the visitors ever came to say was, remember.